Welcome to Tank Talk. I'm your host, Bob Tankard, and this evening's guest is the Honorable Senator of Massachusetts, Julian Cyr. Julian, welcome.
Dr. Tankard, good to be with you. State Senator. I'm the state senator.
I
appreciate the promotion.
Well, state senator, but I know that you've been running like crazy today. And when you come to the Vineyard, you have to hit every door before you can get back on the boat.
Well, I'm not. Yes, we've had a busy day. I was just over at the Edgartown Council on Aging. I'm going to be up at the Oak Bluffs Library, but I'm staying the weekend.
You're
so I'll be
hanging out.
here for a
You're
few days,
out.
but for personal matters.
You know,
just hanging out,
yeah, but you're hanging out.
Yeah.
You get some of the restaurants and do some of the good things.
You bet.
It's supposed to be a decent weekend, a little chilly, but it's going to be nice. Listen, according to the report that I received from one of your assistant, Leslie, you've been running crazy on committees. But what I like most of all is the educational reform that bill that you had. They called it the Students' Opportunity Act. Won't you explain that?
Sure.
And in length, so we can get down.
This is a pretty big deal.
Okay.
And I know this is near and dear to your heart,
Okay.
as an educator and a coach. And if you look at K through 12 education in Massachusetts, we do a really, broadly, we do a good job. But there's a really persistent achievement gap, and that hasn't gotten better.
Okay.
And so what we've been working on, and I serve on the Education Committee, the only member of the Cape and Islands delegation who's on that committee, we've been working to look at how do you take the funding formula that supports K through 12 public education, and how do you make reforms to that so that you're giving more resources to our neediest students.
Okay.
And so what are those needs? Certainly low-income students, English language learners, special education. And so the Education Committee several weeks ago came out with a bill. It's called the Student Opportunity Act. The Senate actually just took it up this week, and we passed it. It was passed unanimously. It's now going over to the House. But what the bill does is it really makes some pretty substantial changes to the Chapter 70 formula that
comes back to the towns.
Or the school districts. We change how we count low-income students. Under the old formula, we only counted low-income students up to 130% of the federal poverty level. Now we count to 180% of the federal poverty level. It's a big deal for islanders, right, who, the cost of living here is so high. We're going to capture more need. We also changed the way we provide resources for English language learners. Under the old system, school districts actually got more money for younger students who were English language learners than older students, which actually doesn't make sense. You got someone who's in kindergarten or first grade, they're going to pick up the language a lot faster than, say, a freshman or sophomore in high school.
Exactly.
So we provide significantly more resources for English language learners, and we provide more resources the older the student is. We also make reforms and put more money and resources to special education, including what's called the Special Education Circuit Breaker. So this is the reimbursement school districts get for special education. Under the old system, we only reimbursed for instructional costs. Now we're actually going to reimburse for transportation costs. So it's another big deal. We've also put more resources in for social emotional learning. If you look at the challenges that schools are facing, students need more and more help with guidance, with mental health, with social supports. We're putting more resources in there. We do a few other things in this bill that are really a big deal. We take a really hard look at rural school districts, like here on Martha's Vineyard, like on the Outer Cape, like on Nantucket. And we actually form a commission to really study how do we create a rural aid program, understanding that the needs that rural schools have are going to be a little different than, say, in a suburban or
Let me ask you a question. When you're talking about dispensing these funds, and you're looking at the schools and in the areas they're in, okay? Now, some of us, when we travel, don't say we're from Martha's Vineyard. We say we're from Massachusetts. Because once you say you're from Martha's Vineyard or from Cape Cod, they think you got deep pockets. They think you probably own 3 or 4 banks and whatnot, or 3 or 4 businesses. They don't think that there's an economy there for regular people, right? How is the state in this funding bill, how it's going to look at each, say, district and say, okay, this is a moderate district, this is a wealthy district, this is a poor district. How do they measure that so that the funds get dispersed in a more excellent way, or with a more equal way? How is that going to happen?
So part of the way we do it is by just putting more money overall into the system.
Okay.
Communities here on Martha's Vineyard and across the region I represent are a little bit of a disadvantage because the original formula was based on property values, which is not reflective. Right? Our property values are not reflective of lived experience for Islanders here. We were able to make reforms that actually added in and counted median income, which I think is a more reflective, is also more reflective of the need. What this bill does is say we're going to put $1.5 billion, new dollars, into the system over 7 years.
Okay.
And we're going to target those resources in giving more resources around low-income students, around English language learners. So for the island, for Martha's Vineyard, we've got a pretty sizable population. The Brazilian community alone here is 5,000-6,000 people.
That's right.
You go into the schools, these are very diverse classes of students. So just in the English language learner component, we're going to get some sizable more resources in this formula. The formula is like profoundly complicated, so it's not. Unfortunately, I can't say like, oh, this is the number and this is what it's going to be, given a whole host of factors around inflation and enrollment. But because we're expanding how we count low-income students, and because we're targeting English language learners, we know, and I know, that that's going to mean good things for Martha's Vineyard.
You know what we find in education? When a child comes in at the kindergarten or first grade, they have no trouble with, first of all, learning the language, and then learning how to read and learning how to write. But when they're coming in the fifth or sixth grade, they get to understand the language quicker. But then they got to learn to read, and they might understand to look at the words, and then they got to learn how to write. And as they get to the high school it's even worse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when that progression takes place, and how many years? You said 7 years. Now, if you took a child or the generations that are coming through, how long will it be before you say, we've put enough monies into these programs and all these cycles should be clear by now? So that most of these people should be on the English language barrier where they are born to speak English, they're reading from an early age and whatnot.
It's a really good question, and achievement gaps are really persistent. And we know that, a given child in a household with a certain education or a certain occupation is just hearing, sort of hundreds of more words a day than a child in another setting, just on average. What we think, though, is that, and we know, I think if we can target more resources and be much more honest about the fact that it costs, you need a lot more resources to help that kid who hasn't had that opportunity catch up and really meet the mandate. Massachusetts, in our Constitution, it's in our Constitution, we have to provide an equitable education to every student in the state. It's in the Constitution, we got to do it. So the idea is if we really target these resources, you put a lot of resources, we're talking about $300 million new dollars into the K through 12 education system every year over 7 years. That we think is really going to help shrink the achievement gap.
Yes, it will.
Is it going to eliminate it?
No.
We got structural inequity and a whole host of justice issues. We're going to have to keep that.
It's going to make a great difference.
Big difference.
And you probably just received every vote from every educator on the Cayman Islands because of this. The other one I want to talk about too is recent hearings of mental health.
Sure.
You probably have heard that over the last month or two, we've had 2 suicides here on the Vineyard, and one was a young student at the high school, and the other one was an older person. So, and I did a show with individuals that talked about suicide, mental health issues. Okay, and it's not only in substance abuse, although you talk about substance abuse and recovery, and I think those are highly important. I deal with some veterans that are having some trouble with these issues. What can we put in place to make it real to our society that this is the main issue? This is not a game. This is not something that just every once in a while. It's happening. Yeah, I know in the vets, from the mental health situation from vets, we're losing 22 a day. Yeah. And they're probably, I know they're keeping a record, but I can't imagine the young people that are saying, I got no hope. The bullying, I got this, that, and the other, and I'm out of here. Whether it's through drugs or whether it's through a violent death or whatnot. You talk about the recent here. Tell us about that.
So this is, I'm the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use and Recovery, right? So considering a whole host of issues around mental health, addictions, mental illnesses. I think first and foremost, mental illnesses, right? This is something folks are just struggling with, right? Just like, a whole and any kind of health challenge, high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiac issues, but fundamentally, our healthcare system treats mental illness differently, right? You wouldn't show up at the hospital if you're in cardiac arrest. You're going to get treatment. You're going to get admitted to the hospital. You're going to get a whole suite of services. You show up to the hospital emergency department having a psychiatric episode, it's likely you're going to sit there waiting for hours, if not days, for someone to see you, for someone to help find a bed, for someone to actually get you the
help
care,
that you need.
The help you need, and under state and federal law is required that you're given. So what we're trying to look at are all the barriers that someone who has a mental health illness or illnesses or challenges, all the barriers they are experiencing through the system.
Why don't we make it so that, as an educational point of view in the schools, not just at high school levels, but for younger kids as well, all the way up, and then begin to talk to the hospitals and the community services that handle counseling, that the doors are open for all these people, and give them an area, a number that they can use to call at any given time to get the help that they need. Is it that people feel restricted in being able to go to a place? Do they feel embarrassed? Like I work at the community services, and I can remember if you went back 20 years ago, people would only want to get their if they had to go to see a counselor, they would only want to go at 7 o'clock at night in the wintertime when it's pitch black and nobody sees them. But now I'm seeing, because I'm there, I'm seeing a lot of people that I know that are going in, and there's nothing wrong in that. You should not feel embarrassed about going because you got an issue and you need. I feel right now, Julian, I feel, Senator, I feel right now this. When I grew up, I had mom and dad to help me out with an issue. My older brothers and sisters, if they could. I had Mrs. Jones, Mr. Jones down the street. I had the priest, the minister over here. I had a teacher or a coach that could help me. Today, I don't know if any of those people are available to these young people today to help them with their issues. You know what I mean? And like I said, I don't know if some of these or some people have hope. The hope is gone.
Well, we know tighter fabric in communities is really a protective factor and helps people. What we're trying to do, first and foremost, on the stigma and discrimination part of this, in the FY20 budget, we put $500,000, which is a sizable chunk of money, to an anti-stigma campaign on mental health that you're going to be seeing rolled out. So we're starting there. But then we're looking at health insurance coverage, right? Where, most health insurance actually, say you need some sort of, pretty significant, psychiatric help, you're having to wait to get approved by the insurance company whether or not you can get that care. I don't know if that should be.
That's a medical help.
Exactly. Looking at emergency departments, right?
That's the same as you need to have your ankle checked because you got hit playing football and you need your x-ray.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Or looking at, all right, for emergency departments, saying, maybe looking at a requirement saying, look, you've got to have a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner who's on staff, 24/7. We wouldn't say, to you if you came in with a cardiac arrest at the hospital. We wouldn't say, oh, you're having cardiac arrest. Well, the cardiac doc isn't in for another few hours, so sit and wait. And so looking there, looking at we got a workforce problem in mental health as well. So it's really hard to attract the social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists that we need to really meet the challenge that we have. So how do you have a pipeline of workforce? How do you incentivize people? Are there loan forgiveness programs? So the committee's looking at a whole host of those challenges. We're also looking at, in the space of substance use disorder and what's called co-occurring disorder, so you have you have an addiction or addictions and mental illnesses, and you're dealing with both of those. What sort of services are we putting there? We're also looking at the opioid epidemic and looking at...
They got to stop that.
Well, it continues to raise. We're still losing 2,000 people a year in Massachusetts, and increasingly, fentanyl, which is this highly potent substance, is ubiquitous. It's in everything. You basically can't find illicit drugs that doesn't have some fentanyl in it. And what that means is it's leading to much higher risk of overdose, much higher risk of death.
And so what happens is it's getting people addicted. I can remember in 2015, I had a knee replacement. And the first thing I went into, and I had my knee replaced just over here, and I went to the doctor. I said, listen, I said, I'm an ex-athlete. I said, I know what pain feels like. And I said, and I'm not taking that stuff, so don't even think about giving it to me. He said, well, I got to give it to you, okay? I said, all right. So when they gave me the Oxycontin, the pills, they gave me a bottle about this big, and then they gave me another prescription for another bottle about that big. And I said, oh, no. So when I got home, I got an operation on a Wednesday. I was home on Friday. The visiting nurse came to me on Saturday and tried to get me 100 degrees when I had 27 clamps in my knee and my knee was swollen. I said, that's not working. Yeah. So Dr. Jacobs and my physical therapist, Larry Goldberg, I went to them. And I said to myself, I told my wife, I said, I know we got some extra Tylenol around here somewhere. Yeah. I took the extra Tylenol just to test it at my physical therapist. It worked. I don't know what my wife did with those pills. I think she took them to the state troopers place where you can dump them. You know what I mean? Drug disposal. But you know one thing? I know many people that got addicted in that short amount of time on taking the pills, and we've got to do something.
And we know that opiate addiction in particular, especially with these prescription drugs, it actually rewires the pathways in your brain. Yeah. And so what we're looking at in the committee I chair are, all right, what else can we throw at this problem? What are any and all interventions that are going to help save lives? One of the more kind of counterintuitive and controversial approaches we're taking a look at is this idea of supervised consumption sites or safe consumption sites, places where people who we know are using can use in a space that's observed, where there's maybe a nurse or a social worker on staff who can make sure that folks aren't overdosing and making sure they don't die. This is actually something the city of Philadelphia has an organization that just won a pretty significant case where a federal judge said, look, these ideas of these safe consumption sites, they're actually meant, and the goal here is to reduce drug use, not to expand it or facilitate it. So we're taking a look at that ruling. We have several bills in the committee. Actually, Representative Dylan Fernandez, who's usually on here with me, he's got one of those bills. So we're taking a look at that. We're taking a look at any and all strategies that we can deploy. They're going to save lives. I mean, we are losing more people in this opioid epidemic than we did in the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. That's how significant this is.
Housing. We talked about housing affordability. Yep. I know we are running into a tremendous amount of problems on the Vineyard with housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have housing for help or anyone, single housing, whatever. I can imagine that on the Cape it's probably the same problem. The Cape comes in, everybody wants to come to Cape Cod, regardless of the shark infestation out there. They still want to come to Cape Cod. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the fact is that is there room? Is there housing, available for all these people? Plus all the help that has to come to accommodate these people.
Economy. Yeah.
You know what I mean? How do we go about it? How can we get land, property that could help affordable housing? Now I'm talking about, you know, on the Vineyard, we say affordable housing, and we charge a person $375,000. Well, I don't know how affordable that is. But it's got to be an area where you have to have affordable housing, where somebody can get into a place for $175,000 and do something. Talk to me about it.
I was just in a meeting earlier today with folks who are working on the homelessness problem in Martha's Vineyard. They estimate, and actually the intake data shows this, that about 1,000 people on island are homeless or housing insecure, right, across a year. So sleeping on a couch, living in their car, some people living in the woods, right? Housing is really the most acute challenge we face, you know, with the exception probably of climate change, which is a little more existential for us. This is a very difficult issue because the housing market here and across the region is geared towards second, third, fourth home ownership.
Exactly.
And so it means that working people who are islanders living here year round, you just can't make it here in the housing market. So we're looking at a few things.
But one of the things you're looking at is the amount of land that one is required in certain parts of the Vineyard to build a house. Now, when you look at a person up in Aquina or Chilmark, they got to have 3 acres of land. Well, that's a lot of land. Now, you figure you got 10 houses that are going up there. That's 30 acres of land that's being used for 10 houses. And I'm saying to myself, isn't it a way that we could somehow alter that so that maybe one of those acres, instead of having 3, they could have 2, and then divide the other one into a half acre so that you can get 2 houses on there, something like that? It's just land. You know, we're on an island.
You only
land
got so
runs
much
out.
Land. Yeah.
You know, and then we have the state forest. And they say, well, you can't touch state forest. Well, if you look at our state forest is going kaput.
So a lot of that has to do with local zoning decisions. What I've been most recently focused on are 11 policies that would really make a difference for housing in seasonal communities like here on island. So I filed a bill called an act relative to housing in seasonal, an act relative to attainable housing in seasonal communities. And it takes 11 policy ideas that, you know, look, there's no one silver bullet here that'll make a difference, but there are a few things we can do. One, we want to make sure that we're preserving the existing rental housing we have, right? A lot of folks actually will rent out a place, they'll do it at affordable rates. I think there should be a property tax incentive to make sure they're doing that, right? To make sure they're not converting that to a condo or selling it off. We want to, currently under existing state law, a school district or municipality is pretty limited in what they can do around building workforce housing, right? Housing for police, teachers, firefighters. We have provisions there. The bill also takes a look at how we count what's counted towards quote unquote capital A affordable housing. Some of the housing that we've had here that we've converted, motel conversions to affordable housing, or the Covenant housing program in Nantucket, that's not counted by the state. I think it should be counted by the state. Looking at an idea that Nantucket's really championed around expanding the deeds excise tax, allowing a local option to, say, have a certain surcharge on, say, properties that sell for over $1 million or $2 million, that we can take a little surcharge of that and put some of those resources into a housing bank or another mechanism where we can pool those resources to build more housing. I think so that's the bill we're working on. I encourage folks to check it out. There's another piece to this too, and that is around wastewater. And the
I was
only
just thinking
way,
about the same thing.
And look, you know,
because the only way seem to be having that problem.
Yeah, the only way we're going to be able to build the housing we need, which is relative, you know, multi-unit, relatively dense, that looks like our existing, you know, downtown villages. You got to have wastewater to do it, right? You can't do that off a Title V septic system.
No, you can't.
And it's cost prohibitive if you're having to build your own sort of mini sewer plant, which sometimes some of these developments do. And so wastewater is crucial. We put in, last session, we passed a pretty landmark piece of legislation. It's called the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. And it's a special pot of money generated from short-term and generated actually from all room occupancy, goes into a fund just for Cape Cod. Martha's Vineyard, under the law, has an opportunity to come into that fund and to benefit from it. Right now, the towns are doing some work.
If they chose to come in, would that give them funds to build better wastewater treatments here on the Vineyard?
Yes, it would give them funds for either new wastewater treatment,
and that would
maintenance on existing.
relieve it from the taxpayer.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's other people's money, right? It's coming from room occupancy.
Oh, yes.
So this is something currently island towns are looking, they need to do some planning with the Department of Environmental Protection to look at what the needs are here. There's some alternative methods that we can use to really reduce nitrogen loading as well. But if you look at the ponds the Great Ponds and the ponds and the embayments on island, our water quality, it's not that good here. And we need wastewater infrastructure if we're going to be able to build the housing we need to keep this a vibrant year-round place. And so I think when people think of housing, you got to think of, we're on an island here, you're on a peninsula on the Cape. When you think of housing, you got to think of wastewater.
Most people think because we're on an island that all the water is surrounding and is pushing into the island, we're always going to have clean, perfect water. Well, that's not always the case. You know what I mean? I think when Edgartown built their sewage plant 20 years ago, that was the beginning of what we need to do here on the Vineyard. And I think with this plan that you're saying that we can connect with the Cape and try to get some of those funds to do. I know that in Oak Bluffs, Jim Bishop, I do some work with Jim Bishop, and he was talking about the project they're trying to build in Oak Bluffs and housing, affordable housing. And the holdup is the septic, sewage. It's actually...
And it's a substantial cost to those systems. So if we're able to expand, expand wastewater, in down island communities where you already have it, where it makes sense, where you've got some pretty impaired embayments, looking at other alternatives up island, where it doesn't make sense to have maybe sewering in those communities, but certainly alternatives where we can make sure that we're preserving our pristine marine environment, which is what generates our economy here, and we're able to build, through that build the housing we need to make this a sustainable place. It's a heavy lift, but I think we've got to talk about it. The alternative, of doing nothing means that we're going to see continued embayment, continued degradation of our waters, and this is going to be increasingly, become a place that's profoundly unaffordable, and people can't be here.
Listen, I looked at these 3 things that you've just been working on for the last few months. You need to go on vacation. you need to go on vacation because this is a lot. And I didn't know that in some of these you didn't get a good night's sleep or a good week's sleep on some of these. I truly appreciate your efforts on all 3 of these.
Thank you.
Okay, and I know that you and Dylan, I refer to you sometimes as Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah, I
know. You guys do a great job in what you're doing, and we appreciate it. Sometimes we don't show it, or sometimes, but you're doing a great job, and we want to continue to support you guys, and thank you for what you're doing. And
it's an honor to serve.
Listen, you always have a voice on Tank Talk, okay?
Appreciate it.
All righty. And thank you for tuning in to Tank Talk. And until next time, this is your host, Bob Tankard, saying good evening.